What's happening, guys? I think today what I want to talk about is what is known as a squib. S-Q-U-I-B, squib. And a squib is what happens whenever the primer is struck on a round, but there is no powder in the shell casing in which to ignite and force the bullet down the barrel. But the primer has enough explosive or percussive energy that it can push the actual bullet, the projectile itself, partially into the barrel. And that can be a dangerous thing whenever you start thinking in terms of, tap rack bang, these clearance, these malfunction drills that you practice for whenever you have like a dud or something like that. And in a dud or a bad round, that means that, the primer was bad, or it got a bad strike on the primer. And it didn't go off at all. But a squib actually sounds kind of like a pop gun. And I've never had one myself, and I've loaded probably close to, 10 or 12,000 rounds of 9mm, on this thing. And before I had this, I used the RC2, the rock chucker. And it's a single stage press, and even then, I've never had a squib load, even with my own reloads. So I've never heard one in real life. So the other day, I actually loaded one and purposely fired it. And don't try this at home. I'm not saying that you should try this, but if you hear something that doesn't sound right when you pull the trigger, you should definitely think twice about it. If the gun just goes click, go ahead, tap, rack it, and then see if you can get back out there on it and see if that cleared the malfunction. And I'll probably make a video later on getting a little deeper into that, but there's tons of videos out there for it. But I really never thought about it until I started reloading ammunition. With store-bought ammunition, you really don't think about it as much, but once you start getting into reloading, you start thinking about things a little differently. And if you have a bad round, you just tap the magazine, rack it, either get rid of that old one, the bad shell or the bad round, and then put a new one in there and go. The problem with that is that if you get in such a habit of going straight to the malfunction drill, and clearing it out, is that if you have a squib load or a squib round and you put a projectile, the bullet, partially into the barrel and it doesn't come out the other end, what happens next is whenever you eject that shell that put the bullet in the barrel and you put another one in there, a live round, and then that bullet is going to fire just fine, and it's going to go straight into the barrel and hit the rear of the preceding bullet. And either, best case scenario, it could force the other bullet out, which I don't know, I'm not willing to try it, or it's going to blow the gun up. And you can look on the internet and find all kind of gory, terrible things that happen whenever a gun barrel gets clogged up and it explodes in somebody's hands or near their face if it's a rifle. So I guess the whole point is that if you're out shooting and all of a sudden you hear just a small pop, like a toy cap gun, and your gun, something just didn't sound right about it. It didn't buck in your hand and the slide didn't come back, but it made a pop. Be very, very aware that that could be a squib round. And what you would have to do, and I'll probably make a video on how to clear one of these, but what you'll have to do is that gun is down until you can field strip the gun and take either a wooden dowel or a brass dowel, something that won't scratch or mar the inside of the barrel or in the rifling, and you actually have to drive that bullet the rest of the way out of the barrel. And I just want people to understand that if a squib load happens, if a squib round goes off in your gun, you should be paying the utmost attention to that. If you hear something like that, just a little pop, and the slide doesn't work back, and you don't feel that, that recoil, then you most likely have a squib, and you need to field strip it, take the gun completely apart, shine a light down the chamber, and see if you can see any light down in there. And most likely, if it's a squib, you'll see the bullet still stuck in the barrel, and then you'll have to really do some work to get that driven out. But I just wanted people to be aware that whenever you're doing these tap rack bang drills and these failure drills, failure to fire, and all that stuff, is to keep in mind that you also have to be aware for malfunctions that can really harm you and your gun, and just to be aware of what the difference between a dud and a squib is. So once again, the squib means, basically, for example, if I loaded a round and I didn't put any powder in it and I just went to the next station, it has a live primer, and I skipped the powder, I put the bullet, the projectile on top and seat it. So you have a bullet that has a primer, a projectile, of course the case, but it has no powder in it to burn, to push the bullet down range. And so what happens is the primer has enough power to unseat the bullet and put it partially in the chamber or into the barrel. But it does not have enough power to push it the rest of the way out. So now you have a clogged barrel. A dud round is something that, like, the primer's bad and it just didn't go off at all. And in which case you would rack it, spit the bad shell out, the bad round out, get to the next one and go back to work. But these are just something you really have to pay attention to, and just keep that at the front of your mind. And for a while, now that you know about this, you'll be really paranoid like I was, and you'll be listening for it. And each time you have maybe a bad primer, you'll freeze. But once I loaded a squib and I shot it a couple of times and drove that bullet out, I really got to know what a squib sounds like. And if you go to these local matches, there's USPSA or IPSC or whatever, there's been stories of guys that had a squib and they go to clear it, and a guy standing in the crowd or an RO next door heard it, and they said, all stop, and just stop what you're doing, because they realize they've heard it before. So they heard that squib, and maybe the shooter was in the heat of the moment, or they fell back on their training and he went to clear the malfunction and just put another live round in there and go back to work. But that guy, there's countless stories of this stuff happening with squib loads. So just know what they are, and maybe even look them up on YouTube. I'll try and make a video in actually firing one and driving one out, and kind of show everybody what that looks like. But just be careful. Remember all your rules of gun safety and gun handling. Be safe, be mindful, protect yourself, protect your family. Know your laws, know your rights. Do some training, ask questions.